So today we're going to talk a lot about natural gardening, how we can use nature to help us in the garden, how we can benefit from all of the creatures and things that are around us every day in our yards and in our communities. So some of the benefits of natural gardening include, these amazing ecological services that we really just can't buy. We're in that kind of pay for it kind of society. We just, lay down some money and get what we want. With ecological services, some of these things are things that just nature can do, like create oxygen. That's, such a huge benefit of plants. We couldn't survive without them. Pollination services, carbon sequestration. These are things that nature does for free all around us all the time. And when we do put a dollar value on them, it's quite amazing and quite astounding just how beneficial plants can be. We can think about using trees to reduce our heating and cooling costs for our homes. We can look at, because trees, are providing, that shade, that wind protection. So these services can benefit us on a daily, and they are benefiting us every second of the day by allowing us to, breathe and have healthy foods. So these natural gardening also helps us with restoration and erosion control efforts and green infrastructure, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few slides. Of course, that wildlife support, which is a major component of this program, and how we can support birds and pollinators with our gardens. And then at the end of the day, we all again benefit from our time. Our time is so precious, and having using some of these concepts around natural gardening can help us to reduce or eliminate some of our time sensitive garden tasks that we sometimes don't like to do. So we can look at this as a way to really help the environment in so many different ways. So we're going to talk about native plants today. So that's any native plant species that inhabited Western Pennsylvania in our case prior to European settlement. So these are plants in that sort of mauve region around that Pittsburgh dot. And those are the plants that we focus on. And a lot of these plants, they do grow in other states and in other parts of in other parts of Pennsylvania, but they, are, sort of within our region and within our range. And the plants and animals, or the animals and other creatures really depend on these plants. So they're so important to wildlife. So they're providing food, nesting, and shelter and protection for animals, not just in the summer, but also in the winter months. And that's, again, part of our topic today is how we can use our gardens and do some things in the fall that are going to help um, support some of these uh, wonderful animals and critters that we love to see in our gardens during the winter. So native plants are very important to people as well. So indigenous people have showed us how to use native plants for food and medicine. Native plants help to keep our water, soil, and air clean. They help protect Western Pennsylvania from flooding. We have a lot of plants that are, indigenous to this area and that are really great at flood control and erosion control. Many of these plants are helping us to reduce some of our pollutants, especially when we think about runoff. We're looking at being able to infiltrate water into the soil and letting the soil and nature help to clear some of these pollutants from our water. Some plants just happen to be able to capture trash, which is a function of rain gardens, which we'll talk about in a minute. Also, plants are providing a sense of place and biodiversity, and sometimes that's a little bit hard to see when we're kind of sitting staring at our computer, but I encourage everyone to go outside after this presentation and just, breathe in the air and take a look at the beautiful plants and biodiversity that we have in Western Pennsylvania. And just get inspired by what we see in our backyards and in our wood lots around our communities. Um, Another important thing that native plants do for people is help us to reduce the need for garden chemicals. So, we can use native plants and not have to use chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and poisons in our gardens. And this is a really, great way to help maintain Earth's ecology and health of our populations of insects and birds. So native plants are a keystone species, meaning a large number of other species depend on them. So this is a Midwestern native species, but we see that bee in the center of the flower. So that interaction between the native plant and the species of bee are creating resources for other forms of life. So for us, for people, we're getting food in the form of sunflower seeds in this case. You can press those seeds and make oil. And with sunflower oil, you can create biodiesel, which is a fuel that can run, engines. We can also use it for cooking and other sources of food. In Birds and animals are also getting the support of those seeds, and then our higher predators are benefiting from those animals. So that interaction between that native plant and that insect is what drives that circle. So unfortunately, there are threats to native plants, and we can look at some of these as overlap with threats to birds, insects, and other forms of life, as well as people. So, I talked about a few slides ago how when we collect seed, we're looking to collect for genetic diversity. So that's a big problem with native plants. The populations of plants are just shrinking. So less plants, less genetic diversity. So again, having seed-grown plants instead of plants done from cuttings or micro propagation or divisions is really important. That genetic flexibility allows those plants to be able to deal with things like climate change or invasive species, and um, helps to keep them strong. We also look at poor air and water quality. We see that on leaf growth and on the health of plants. Around poor water, we typically don't see a lot of plants. So we need to, think about how all of these things impact the plants that we're so dependent on. And habitat loss, again, driving that genetic loss of plants, and also reducing resources for other forms of life. Important insects are on decline, like bees, and then pest insects are on the rise, like ticks. I just wanted to, make sure everybody is aware of what ticks look like. They're still around in the fall and in the winter. We typically think of them as spring and summer pests, but their populations are really exploding in Western Pennsylvania. There's three major diseases that they can transmit, so we really need to be hyper vigilant and watch out for ticks. They really love underneath of the invasive species barberry. So if you have that plant or you come across that plant, you want to really be cautious. They really seem to proliferate underneath of that tree or underneath of that shrub. So this is really important. It causes impacts on human health and human food crops. We're looking at again problems for many different types of creatures. And also, just plant populations in general are finding difficulty being able to adapt and survive. So we look at whole communities of plants in parts of the country and parts of the world that just are not able to adapt, and we are hopefully not going to lose them in the future. So being being aware that we can make a difference. North America has 3 billion less birds than it did just 50 years ago. So we look at habitat destruction as being really a main cause of um, loss of populations, whether that's birds, insects, or native plants. So yeah, that was a lot. There was a lot of slides with a lot of sort of sad topics, but there is hope, and we are that hope. We can use our gardens to help the environment. We can do that today. We can continue to do that throughout, throughout the year. And these really do make a difference. Every native plant that you put in the ground is another opportunity for resources for insects and birds, and another just chain in that connecting fragmented habitat. So we really are trying to do that with our certified backyard habitat program. When you have these, communities, well, individuals, neighborhoods, communities, and in the broader kind of working together, we're being able to connect some of that fragmented habitat. We're able to increase that biodiversity just right in our own living space. Our backyard habitat program focuses on really residential landscapes and basically connecting people with really simple, like planting plants, helping to, be aware of when to cut plants back, and we'll talk about that. So these are impactful ways that we can support birds and pollinators with just some simple efforts that we can do right in our own backyards. Even if you don't have a yard or a big yard, that doesn't matter. We don't need a big space to make a difference. We can make a difference with one container garden, or adding, a couple of native plants to our existing landscape. So together, we're helping to make a difference. We're seeing it in our own yards, and hopefully impacting others and encouraging others to make a change too. So I often use this slide as a way that we can think about how to get started. But I especially like to talk about some of these things as they relate to fall and winter, because these are really great projects to do during sort of the growing downtime. So now is a perfect time, if you haven't done it already, to inventory your landscape space in the neighborhood and see what's missing. So that's kind of a really good way, especially if you have a small urban space where you're able to maximize your impact by not planting the same things as everybody else has, especially when it comes to trees. Having tree diversity is very important. Trees are also blooming. So a lot of, that happens way up in the top of the canopy, and we don't think about trees as being that type of pollen resource or nectar resource or seed resource. But think of a great big tree and just how much volume of nectar or food resources are there. And if we can have trees blooming and offering these resources at all different times of the year, we're going to really maximize that impact that we have. So being able to look at what you have, think back, because now we can still, kind of remember what was going on in the spring of this year and in the summer and where things were. And so we can either draw up a small plan or think about what is already going on in our landscapes. That way, when we can kick back in the winter, when we're, want to get out there and garden, but maybe it's snowing, we can look at our plan and develop and think about plants that we want to add and research during the winter. And that's a really nice fall, fall and winter project. We can think about those interesting spots, those spots that we just really loved, or maybe that spot that you sat in during the summer a lot, and we can increase the amount of plants or the amount of resources that are in that spot, that spot that you just really loved, or maybe a view that was fantastic, except for maybe it just needed one thing that might have been 8 feet tall, and it would have totally just made the view. So we can think about that. We can also think about those trouble spots, the spots in the garden where we planted stuff and it just didn't do well. Maybe it was super wet. during the year, or the other way, maybe it just dried out so much and everything died there. So we can look at these spots as learning opportunities, or start from scratch, or create a garden in this spot that seemed to give you trouble. Observe what's coming in, and especially during fall migration. So this could be a really good opportunity to see some different types of birds, and maybe some different wildlife that you haven't seen, and maybe make a mental note on what you are seeing a lot of, so that you might be able to increase the ability to support those during the year. And of course, plant something. So we have a ton of plants still available in our plant shop, and some of them are super cheap. We have this really cool boneyard section in our plant shop where plants are like $1 to $6, and you can get a whole lot of plants for really cheap. So we still have a lot of those available. If you missed our sale last week, they're still out there, and there's still some really good stuff. Another great thing to do in the fall is to think about our invasive species. Invasive species are really tough to manage, very difficult to deal with. But these two in particular, knotweed, which is the one on the left of your screen, and the stokegrass, the knotweed has that white flower, and the stokegrass is there on the right side of your screen, kind of looks like bamboo almost. So this is the time to cut those plants back, pull them out, string trim them, do whatever you can so that these plants do not set seed. So they're forming now, flowers are beginning. So we want to make sure that in the fall we're not allowing these seeds to generate. Again, these plants are difficult to manage, but reducing their seed impact is huge. Sometimes stokegrass, that's a lot how it spreads, mainly is from seeds. So being able to reduce that is going to be really, really impactful. We recommend, if you can, to dispose of especially knotweed in the garbage instead of in the compost. You can make biochar out of it. I don't have time to go into that right now, but it is a way that you can sort of reuse some of these plants, and you can look that up. There's a lot of cool methods to make biochar. But again, getting rid of these plants before they set seed is really critical. And then you can use those spaces to put new plants in, if you're able to get them under control to a decent density. So fall is a really good time to do soil testing, because fall is the best time to add soil amendments. Reason why is because there's a lot of precipitation in the fall and in the winter, especially when we're talking about the ground freezing and thawing, and that actually forces these particles into the soil, which is where we want them. We don't really want them on the surface of the soil. We want them kind of in the ground, like pretty deep. And so being able to take advantage of nature freezing and thawing and opening up aeration spaces in the soil helps to kind of push these things down. So some of the things that you might be doing after your soil test, and of course you test your soil first and then you add your amendments. Sometimes you don't need to add amendments. Clay soil is naturally acidic, and so its pH range is typically between 5.5 and 7. And that's good because that's where plants mostly like to grow. The 5.5 is a bit acidic, so we're looking at specific plants like blueberries and hollies that kind of prefer that. That would be where lime would come in. If you're at 5 or 5.5, you might want to increase the alkalinity of that soil. Green sand is a really fantastic organic kind of clay buster. So it helps to break up super heavy or compacted clay. Getting a pitchfork into your soil and loosening it up a bit and then putting the green sand in, and then allowing that freeze thaw and that precipitation to kind of push that down really will help to break up those clay particles. It doesn't work overnight. It takes some time and maybe a few seasons, but you will notice a difference, and it also adds some organic nutrients as well. If you have a lot of bulbs or native plants um, that sort of initiate from tubers or bulbs, I'm thinking of things like um, Virginia bluebell, bloodroot, um, uh, wood poppy, some other spring things, and other things that again are growing more from a bulb or tuber. Bone meal is an excellent organic fertilizer. Again, putting that down in the fall so that in the spring the bulbs will have those nutrients ready to go. Again, soil amendments only added when no storms are expected, because we don't want to put this down and then storms wash it off and then it goes into our water supply, and that's not good. Even though all of the things I mentioned are organic, we still don't want additional fertilizers into our water. It creates algae blooms and other things that can be problematic in ponds and other spaces like that. So you can usually get soil tests at garden centers. You can also use our fantastic Penn State Agricultural Extension Office. If anybody here works for them or knows people there, give them a good shout out. They do a lot of good work and do amazing things for Western PA. So another thing, and again, I'm kind of starting with soil and working my way there. Working my way up from the soil is kind of the format of the program here. So caring for our soil-dwelling organisms is so important, and we can do a lot of work for that in the fall by not doing so much soil disturbance in the fall, like rototilling and doing a lot of things like that. Research over the past decade or so has shown that having soil fungi, that beneficial soil fungi in you know in cooperation with our native plants really helps to keep them strong and healthy. These networks are take sometimes a lot to form and to grow. So disturbing them by doing a lot of deep tilling or earth moving is disruptive and isn't as beneficial as sort of layering things, layering compost, layering materials like cardboard or newspaper for a sheet mulching strategy instead of sort of digging up the soil before we plant. Solarization can work very well if you start it in the fall, let it go through winter and into early spring, and then usually 6, 8, maybe a year of solarization on really bad areas can help. This reduces weeds, weed seeds, and also creates sort of a clean slate for you to plant without doing tilling. So having these creatures in the soil is going to help break up clay, help add nutrients, and create a lot more aeration in our soil. And again, that Pittsburgh clay can be rough, so having these extra things to work in our benefit can really be helpful. Now, remember, native plants are used to our clay soils, so they can tolerate it. But a lot of us, live in places that might not have natural soils. The way that we build and stuff, we kind of dig up the soil and then replace it. Sometimes the soil that's replaced is not always uh, super nutrient rich and also compacts very quickly and easily. So helping to build soil fertility in the fall, I think the two best things that we can look at, two best strategies, are cover crops and compost. And both of these methods are going to build soil fertility, and they're going to add microorganisms, which is living soil. And that's really important for the health of the plants later on, is to have soil that is balanced with lots of nutrients and also beneficial fungi and living organisms. So green manure is a fantastic thing to do in the fall. It's a cover crop. Basically, you can use a lot of different things, but the best and most nutrient rich is legumes or beans, peas, anything in that family. Generally, it's an annual crop, like again, peas or beans. You can also use annual grasses like annual rye. Um, there is buckwheat, oats. These can all be used as green manure. So basically, this plant is grown to sort of like halfway, and like before. So peas, you're growing them until they create pea pods, and we can eat the peas. But for cover crops, we're really only growing them like halfway. We're not really worried about producing seeds or food. We're just growing them a little bit to get them nice and bushy and leafy, and then we're turning them back into the soil. So we're kind of chipping them up, using maybe a pitchfork with a twisting motion, digging them back into the soil, and then they're going to decompose in a few weeks, 2, 3 weeks or so, and then they're adding those nutrients into the soil and we can plant. They're reducing erosion and weeds by growing here, but planting them in the late summer or fall to have them remain in the winter, that's where they're really doing a great job at reducing erosion and helping the soil to stay in place, and also reducing those weeds that might come up, especially in the early spring or late summer. So these crops are going to be there. They're going to grow for a little while. They're going to die. When the weather gets really cold, they're just going to lay there over the winter. And then in the fall, we're going to do that same thing where we're using our pitchfork, maybe in a twisting motion, pulling, making sure the roots kind of come up out of the ground, twist them into the soil. They will again decompose and add all those nutrients into the soil, and then we can plant either perennials or food crops on top of that in the spring. Using up our compost that we took all of our care and time during the spring is great to do now. So again, getting them on the plants in the summer will allow them to use those nutrients to get nice strong roots for the winter. Maybe a flush of flowers for some of our late blooming plants. And then getting our compost sort of out there and our bins empty to get started for another season. If you have not started a compost pile yet and you want to, totally not too late. We can get started on a new bin. So if we get rid of our compost sort of in the early fall, we can still add to that pile during the late fall and into the winter, as long as it's not frozen. And then we can continue on with that compost effort. So again, we're reducing our waste by getting rid of our vegetable scraps, tea bags, cardboard, and things like that in our compost. That breaks down and then just adds more nutrients to the ground, and we're again encouraging that beneficial fungi, those microbes, those animals and insects that are helping us to keep our soil less compacted and more nutrient rich. Trench composting is another really great thing to do in the fall, and then you'll have a nice area ready for the spring. So this is kind of what it sounds like. You dig a trench. Usually it's about 2 shovels deep. You're just putting in your raw compost, and then you have that little berm of soil from your dig, and then you just add cardboard, or you can do like a layer of veggies, then a layer of cardboard, a little bit of soil, and then start again. And usually you can get maybe 2 or 3 layers. And then all that's going to decompose during the late fall into the winter and early spring. And then when you come back in the spring, it's probably going to be decomposed and ready to go. And it'll just be a really nice, pliable, easy to use bed. I like the way the example shows how this person is expanding a little bit at a time. So we can see their vegetables, looks like maybe squash or something, maybe some kind of berry. And then they're doing, one foot of space. Doing a trench compost, that's going to take a couple of weeks to kind of get all together, and then maybe moving on to another one, or maybe that's the year. Maybe they're digging a 20 by 1 foot trench, and that's going to be, what's going to be the space for next season. So really great way to just use nature to help us create new garden beds. So a lot of us can't do composting in the winter. It maybe is the ground is frozen, or it just doesn't break down quick enough to prevent rodents and other animals from wrecking havoc. So we can do indoor composting. We can start this in the fall and have it go through winter. Vermicomposting using worms and microorganisms is a great method to do indoor composting. You can do this in all types of methods, all different kinds of ways. There's a really, it's an older book, but Worms Eat My Garbage. It's really cool and tells you all kinds of, sort of interesting and offbeat ways to sort of create these vermicomposting bins. If you have a space that does not get frozen, so can't be out in a like unheated garage, but in any space that stays, above freezing, you can do vermicomposting. It doesn't um, uh, break down tons and tons of material super quickly, but it certainly is a good way to get rid of a little bit of your food waste during the late fall and winter. Bokashi is another really interesting method of indoor composting. This does break down pretty quickly into a liquid fertilizer. So this uses a fermenting process. So all of you brewers or anybody who's into kombucha might be really interested in doing this method of composting. This can compost a lot more than vegetables. So you can put like all types of things in here that you wouldn't think are compostable. So anything that biodegrades can go into bokashi. And then you use a sort of yeast activated bran, and that is what works on the bokashi. So it ferments it instead of breaking it down like traditional compost. But very cool and very easy, no smell or anything, and very easy to do indoors. So just a few, things to think about when we're talking about soil. Having a good base for our plants to grow, having that prepared soil bed is really going to save you a ton of time, effort, and energy later. We got, just those couple of slides that we talked about in the last 10 minutes or so. We talked about how to prepare a weed-free space, how to get our soil nice and uncompacted, how to enrich it with nutrients, not using chemicals, and how to reduce our food waste by utilizing compost. So all of those things are going to give us that solid base that we are going to have to grow our beautiful plants on. So caring for pollinators, remembering that we need them. They are such an important part of our lives. Beneficial insects. So when I'm talking about beneficial insects, we're talking about everything, including things like the soldier beetle, which is on the screen right now. So those are predator insects. So we need those as well. So these are helping to keep our pest insects down. They like to go for those kind of slow moving insects like scale and aphids and things that are bothering our plants. So, that might look like a nefarious character there, but that one is actually really good. And being able to identify the insects that are on our plants before we squish them is really important. So I encourage you, and we'll talk about it later, but encourage you to look at the iNaturalist app or some of those other ID apps or field guides to figure out what's going on in your space. So we really want a pesticide-free environment that's going to help these beneficials to be able to reproduce. Beneficial insects reproduce slower and at fewer numbers than pest insects do. So, for example, if we go out in our garden, spray a bunch of pesticide, we're going to get rid of all the insects. So that's our pollinators, our pests, and our predators. But the pests are going to come back much quicker, and they're going to be in way bigger numbers. And then when the beneficials do come around later, they're going to be much more of a struggle, and it's going to be harder to get that balance back in order. So no pesticides. We're going to have hopefully a nice even balance, and there's going to be some pests out there, but we're going to have those other predators and things out there to keep that at a minimum, and hopefully our plants will thrive. So beneficials need shelter, which includes densely planted foliage, mulch, leaves, brush, and other types of natural materials. Water, and that's really for bugs. That's really or insects. That's really dew mostly, and just rainwater. And then their food. Sometimes it's plants. So don't be freaked out whenever you see some nibbles on your plants, because it could be a monarch butterfly caterpillar larva chewing on your milkweed. It could be, spice bush swallowtail caterpillar chewing on your spice bush. So not all of those holes are bad. There's this really cool leaf cutter bee that cuts little circles out of leaves to use it to pack their nests, pack their eggs in stems. So these are all, just natural things that we want to have happen. So not all damage on plants is bad damage. So just observe and see what's coming in, and then notice, when things are maybe starting to harm the plants or get out of control, and then you can look at solutions to that before it becomes a huge problem. So the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign is a really good kind of checklist to look at to see how we're using our land. So being able to provide foraging habitat, reproductive sites, shelter, reducing invasive and exotic species, not using chemicals, and helping science by monitoring, we can really do a lot to help the environment. So just something simple as monitoring a garden down the road. If you don't have a garden, that is helping the cause. So there's a lot that we can do in the fight for environmental protection. So when we're planting for pollinators, we want to think density and diversity. So 8 or more plant species would be great. We'd get lots and lots of insects of all different kinds, shapes, sizes, and sort of workloads. We want our flowers to be all different sizes, shapes, heights, colors. The shape of the flower is really important because that often dictates what's coming to it. So we don't want all flowers that are kind of the same shape, like disc gray, like a daisy. We want them all different shapes. Having these diverse plantings that resemble native plant communities really helps to keep our maintenance down, because they're likely to resist fungal problems, pest problems, because again, there's lots of plants bringing in lots of diverse insects, helping to manage all of these issues. I also think that fall is a really excellent time to visit our parks and community spaces. A lot of our county parks now have been putting in meadows and using native plants and landscapes in that type of space. So we can see what plants thrive in these environments and translate them into what's in our yard. So remember, a lot of these parks, even Audubon, we don't have like a full-time staff that's going out there, monitoring these meadows or, pulling weeds and that type of thing. Most of the time they're planted and they're left on their own. They might get mowed once every 3 or 4 years, but they're on their own. So when you're looking at these plants, we can, say, okay, these are plants that are thriving here in like this open space where they're not getting much attention. So you can try and replicate some of those species in garden spaces, that you have. And by providing all of this diversity, we're providing resources for all of those changing life stages. So whether that's, laying eggs, uh, that larval stage that most of the time is eating leaves, and spaces for chrysalises and butterfly um, nectar and pollen. So all of that is happening in our native plant communities. So again, thinking density and diversity. So now I'm going to just veer off a little bit and talk about some green infrastructure. And for this, there may be a lot of you that have rain gardens, or that maybe seen rain garden or have one in your community. So we're just going to talk a little bit about the needs of rain gardens. And remember, they're so important because they're helping to keep our water clean. So whether you're into flowers or wildlife, or whether you just care about your own health of yourself and your family, keeping Pittsburgh water clean is very important. We're mostly getting our water from the river. So having stormwater runoff, having sewage overflows, and pollution in our rivers, that impacts us directly. So what we can do on our space is to help reduce stormwater. We can reach out to our community leaders, and our government officials, and help them to understand why managing stormwater in the Pittsburgh region is so important. So rain gardens work by taking rain that would have normally gone into the sewer system. A lot of our communities here in Pittsburgh still have combined sewers, which means they're road water from, that runs off when it rains into the road, also goes into the same pipe that sewage goes into. So whenever you get even the smallest amount of rainfall, we get overflows of that sewage into our rivers, again causing more chemicals needed to be added for water treatment, potential, issues there. So this method collects water. It could be from a rooftop, it could be from a parking lot, a driveway, any space that is impervious. So a space that's covered by cement, concrete, roof. Those are all impervious surfaces that don't allow the water to infiltrate back into the ground. So these gardens are dish shape, and their main purpose is to force that water into the ground. So we want that water to slowly infiltrate into the soil. That's going to take weeks, sometimes months, to then eventually reach a creek or stream through underground methods. It's going to reach the water table, and it's going to be cleaned uh, by minerals and things that are in the water, and just the process of it going through soil. The plants are so crucial because they are evapotranspirating a lot of that water, bringing it back up, and using it in their plant processes. And also their roots are punching through that compacted soil and helping the water to go down even further. So this is a great way to help manage stormwater. So if you do have a rain garden, or you have a community and maybe you volunteer to help maintain that rain garden, we're going to be not watering as much, clearly, because it's fall. And the reducing of the watering is mostly, we're watering new plants here, not established plants, but a newly planted garden. Um, Rain gardens require some inspections. Like I mentioned, a lot of trash gets sort of directed into rain gardens. So we can look at how the water is entering. Sometimes we plan it coming in one way, but it ends up coming in a different way. So we can look at that. Weeding and mulching, dividing and pruning. Every couple years, it's recommended to kind of cut down some of the perennials. If there is a necessity to revegetate, doing that in the fall is really helpful. Sometimes these are intended to collect sediment, So sometimes extra sediment can sometimes build up and cover up the plants. And we never fertilize rain gardens just because they're getting enough nutrients from sort of the runoff that's coming in. So these are really great things to do in the fall. Rain gardens are functioning during the winter time. So even though the plants might not be green, the soil and the roots are still working together to infiltrate the water. A lot of folks have invested in rain barrels, which is a fantastic way to collect water for your garden and help manage some storm water and be able to reuse a lot of this water. So again, making sure your rain barrel is large enough to manage the water and to have an overflow situation where water is directed away from the house. So in the winter or in the late fall, we need to think about winterizing our rain barrel. So sometimes, as long as you have that overflow directed away from the house, we can just sort of open the valve, maybe put a hose or an extension into the area where we are having that overflow and just let it open during the winter, and snow melt and rain will just flow into that overflow situation. Some people have a downspout diverter where you just switch a, a knob on your downspout and then it goes not into the rain barrel, but into back into the sewer system. So main thing is we don't want water in the barrel during the winter because it'll freeze and crack it. So, again, keeping that open or diverting the water out and keeping it open because even rain will sometimes get in there and cause problems. So that's some things that we need to do for our rain barrel. And then whether you have a rain barrel or a rain garden or just in general, checking our downspouts, making sure they're free of debris. In the summer, we get a lot of leaves and pine needles and pine cones and things that can end up in our gutters. And helping them be free of debris will help that uh, flooding issue and help us to keep things functioning correctly around our homes. So we also want to think about, reducing ongoing maintenance by eliminating our pesticides and chemical use. So we talked about how we can do that. Reducing soil disturbance, we talked about that, and we can leave leaf litter. So, in the fall, we want to remove some of the leaves, but we do want to leave a nice, big, thick coating of leaf litter on our gardens to help pollinators and other insects. Um, when we're deadheading, in the past, it used to be, oh, cut everything back in the fall all the way down to the ground. Well, if we want to support wildlife, we want to leave that those resources up because we're going to be talking about a lot of plants and having those seed resources available throughout the winter is what animals and birds depend on. So we want to leave a lot of that up. We want some of that seed to spread and spread into our gardens and help us so that we don't have to plant more. And then, a lot of it's just left for food for wildlife. Pruning in the fall, I always recommend it really should be very light. We're not thinking about removing any large branches or trees at this time. We want to save that work for the winter when the trees and shrubs are dormant. So after the leaves after the plants lose their leaves, trees or shrubs in the winter, then it's pretty good time to prune. So we're thinking about like November through February. Um, that's the time that it's best to take larger branches, do major pruning on trees. We especially want to do pruning on things like birch, oaks, and other things that have a potential of getting viruses or pests. We want to make sure we do that pruning in the winter. Most of the time, those pests aren't around, and the tree has more opportunity to heal and be prepared for spring growth. So in the fall, we want to focus on dead wood, and again, allowing most of our perennials to stand. When pruning, if you're just looking for purely aesthetics, you typically prune after the flowers are finished blooming, and keeping plants a bit thinner. I recommend pruning be more dense, let the plants be denser, and that way we're able to support more wildlife that way. Many times, if you prune after the flowers are finished blooming, then you're reducing the seed source. So that's really critical if you're thinking about wildlife support. I used to do some landscaping um, for a decade or so, and I would talk to some clients, and they'd be like, "Oh, can you get rid of this shrub? It just doesn't do anything. It's just green." And I would be like, "No, that's a beautiful shrub. After it flowers, it has this wonderful fruit." And then say, "I never saw that fruit ever because they kept pruning it after it flowered, so they never saw what that third stage of the plant, which was a fantastic red fall fruit." So keeping these plants and allowing them just to go through their natural processes can be not only beautiful and aesthetically pleasing for us, but also support that wildlife. So when we're thinking about prime necessities for wildlife in the garden, these are the four things we really should be focusing on. So that's nesting space, food, shelter, and water. Again, taking a hike or a walk outside and looking at nature as we're thinking about our gardens is really fantastic inspiration. We can see this layered habitat. I can talk about it and tell you about it, but when you go out in nature and actually see it, that really can help you to understand kind of how you want uh, your yard to be structured so that you can provide all of these resources in a very small space. It's really just amazing how much impact you can have with just sort of a vertical habitat and vertical vegetation. There can really be a lot of dense value in that. So now we're going to kind of sit back. We'll take a look at some birds and some really cool plants and what these birds need in order to survive during the winter. So I focused here on resident birds, not a whole ton, but just some of our favorites. So these are birds that are going to be sticking around during the winter, and they're going to be needing resources during the winter. So we have our fantastic members of the woodpecker family, and I've been seeing affiliated woodpecker here at the reserve by the plant center all season. So I'm really excited about that. And I also saw a northern flicker nest in my adventures this year. So that was really cool to see the baby flickers. So these are resident birds. They're a cavity nester, and they're searching for insects for the most part. So oak trees are fantastic for insects. They're one of the best plants, top number one pick for caterpillars. So their leaves are providing a lot of those resources. Lots of caterpillars eat oak leaves. We don't really notice that damage because they're so big, and there's so much opportunity um, for insects to have a feast there, and they do a really great job of supporting a lot of different types of insects. So acorns, a lot of weevils actually live in acorns. So not only can birds get the meat from the acorn, but they're also getting insects in there. Quercus, any oaks or other types of trees with rough bark or platy bark, like you see on that oak. Insects lay eggs underneath of that bark, in it, around it. So a lot of times we'll see woodpeckers and other birds sort of, climbing up the trunks of the trees, and they're picking insects from these little nooks and crannies. So one big oak tree can really provide a lot of resources for wildlife in the winter and all through the year. Malice or crabapple. Um, this fruit, again, sort of like the acorn, you get a lot of worms and other insects inside the fruit. So that's a really great way to have that support. Uh, Throughout the winter because they're actually like fresh in there. So you'll see a lot of times birds picking through the apples and they're like getting the worms or the insects in there. Crab apples are also pretty short-lived trees. So a lot of times when you have a crab apple, you'll have a dying branch, a branch that is decaying, and all of that decaying wood is perfect for cavity excavation and also for insects that are sort of attacking or using that wood as well. So we're having, you know, it's kind of a weird way to look at a tree is like, oh, it has like a dead branch on it. But that's nature and that's kind of the lifestyle of apple trees. They just don't live super long. So they tend to have, these little issues. And sometimes, that's a good thing for wildlife. Snag trees and brush piles are really good for woodpeckers and 20% of other woodland creatures that depend on wood. Brush piles don't have to be this massive, 20-foot, eyesore of a stick pile. It can just be like a you know, couple of sticks, maybe a 3 foot little, 1 foot pile. And that's actually going to generate a whole lot of activity there. It's going to provide some shelter for some small mammal to run in and take shelter. It's going to provide that dead wood that we talked about that the insects will be living in, and birds can find those insects nice and easy on that brush pile. And also those snag trees, because they're decomposing, they're uh, prime resources for nest cavities. So chickadee and titmouse family. So this is the tufted titmouse with his little feather peak there in the front, so adorable. These guys are finding an existing cavity, so they really are needing these softer trees, trees that have already been excavated by maybe a woodpecker or another bird or animal, and they're using that nest cavity. Their main food is insects and nuts. Here's our black cap chickadee, another resident. Oh, they're so cute, little puff balls, not fur, clearly, feather balls. And they also find an existing cavity, and their main foods are insects and nuts. So some good feeding opportunities for these types of birds are cone-bearing plants, and in this case, eastern hemlock. So the seeds are kind of tucked up underneath of those scales, and as the pine cone sort of goes from green to brown, it gently opens, and then those seeds will be available. Because eastern hemlock is an evergreen, it's providing shelter in the winter and protection against winter storms. Any of our asters are fantastic fall plants. This is purple stem aster, which has a really nice dark sort of reddish purple stem and then a pale purple flower. We have lots of different asters, white, purple, some for sun, some for shade. But because they bloom so late in the season and they're one of the last flowers to bloom, they're still attracting loads of insects. And so that's giving our insect loving birds a lot of resources to build up their fat reserves and their muscles for winter. The nuthatch family. This is the white-breasted nuthatch, another resident bird. They like cavities. They're cavity nesters, so that's where they're going to be. And they are also in search of nuts and insects. So here we have white pine, just a bigger cone. So hemlock cones are maybe 2 inches or so. Eastern white pine cones could be 6, 8 inches long. Again, the seeds are in those scales, so as they open, they're going to be releasing. There's various caterpillars that like eastern white pine. So sometimes we'll see those munching on munching on the needles, and then we'll get our winter residents and other birds in there munching on those. And again, because this is a evergreen, it's going to be providing shelter and protection from predators and winter storms. Solidago or goldenrod, another one that has a whole lot of representatives. So we have Canadian goldenrod that's super aggressive, and we typically find that in our meadows. But we also have other more mild goldenrods that like the shade, and they're a lot less aggressive. So there's probably a goldenrod for your space. And they're, bright yellow, bright gold, just a true Pittsburgh classic, beautiful natural meadow, pop of color in the fall. And again, late blooming, lots and lots of nectar and pollen. So giving all of those food resources very late in the season, which so many animals need to build up their reserves before they migrate or hibernate or lay eggs or nest. Here we have the thrush family, so American robin, a resident making its nest of grasses, twigs, and mud. Its main food is insects and fruit. So we have spice bush. Spice bush, the fruit is starting to turn colors now, and it will be out there for another month or so, bright red. And then as the fruit kind of disappears and gets eaten, the leaves will turn bright yellow, very beautiful. Sometimes spice bush seeds will linger on the trees into early winter. Um, they're beautiful red, fleshy fruit. So they have a lot of lipids and other nutrients that birds, especially migrating birds and overwintering birds, need, again, to bulk up and get prepared for the winter. So excellent choice. This is a part shade shrub that blooms very early in the spring and is a great winter resource and also a larval host. Staghorn sumac, you're starting to see these now turning bright red. We'll see these along the rivers. This is an easy, recognizable plant because of that big red aggregate of seeds. So there's like hundreds and hundreds of seeds all jam packed into that cluster, providing food for birds well into the winter. We can easily tell the difference now between our friend, the staghorn sumac, and our sort of spotted lanternfly magnet, the tree of heaven, by the fruit. So our sumac has this bright red aggregates, kind of triangle shape, and the tree of heaven has a big cluster, white cluster of like samaras. So big difference on their seed structure. Here we have the waxwings, the waxwing family with our cedar waxwing resident, making nests out of fiber, hair, and moss. Ooh, nice, comfortable nest. And its main food is fruit and berries. So it gets its name cedar waxwing because the eastern red cedar is one of its favorite food plants. That red fruit is a modified cone. So this is still considered a conifer. It's scaly instead of needle-like, has scale-like leaves. Beautiful evergreen. They get pretty big, and they will, again, provide that food resource with those sort of fleshy cones, and also winter protection and shelter. Hawthorn is a fantastic winter fruit, like the American holly and winterberry holly and inkberry holly. These fruits need to hang on the tree for a good while before they're actually palatable. So they're going to be available usually in January, February, maybe late December. So both basically when most all the other fruit resources are gone, these fruits are still hanging on the tree. They go through a freeze thaw process, and that kind of sweetens them up and makes them a little bit more palatable. And again, kind of delays birds from eating them so that they will have a food resource in the winter. Bright red fruits on bare stems. These trees have big thorns on them, so they can help protect smaller animals against larger predators. And that's especially important in the winter. Finch family, we have our goldfinch, another resident, using plant fibers as its nest, and its main food source is seeds. Another member of the finch family are cardinals. They tend to like live together when they are not nesting, and then they're kind of territorial when they are. But you'll see them grouped together. And you can see the resemblance here with the beaks of the cardinal and the finch. And so that's a good seed beak. So they're after fruit and seeds. Rudbeckias are really fantastic fall perennials for seed resources because they do hold their seeds for a really long time. Some of our cone flowers, we had our green-headed coneflower, which is the big representative on the right side of the screen. That one still had seeds on it in the spring, and we watched birds feed on those all through the winter. Um, the brown-eyed Susan and black-eyed Susan, they seem to be a little more favored, and they don't always last into the winter. But the green-headed coneflower really does produce a lot of seeds, and they really hold on for quite some time. But this is a fantastic later blooming, blooms in the fall. Uh, the green-headed coneflower has been blooming already. Brown and black-eyed Susan are really starting to pop. Any of our perennial sunflowers will do that same thing. They're going to, provide those seeds throughout the late fall and into the early winter. Again, the only way you're going to get these seeds and fruit is if you let them mature on the plant. So that's not cutting them down. Our turkeys and grouse, they're typically ground nesters, and they like to feed on nuts, especially in the winter. So they'll be after acorns and hazelnuts. Hazelnut plants make a really nice stand. They kind of can make a colony, and the fruit, the nut right there is so beautiful. It kind of looks like a flower in its shell. So lovely. Hazelnut also, you can see this one has a lot of holes in it because it is eaten by several different, lots of different caterpillar species. Doug Talame, super duper source on insects, and did so much wonderful work. So this is his top plants for species that support caterpillars. So we could see oaks at the top there. We could see our crabapple that we talked about at 311. So we see that these plants are going to be eaten by caterpillars. So again, don't freak out about that. It's part of nature, and what we want to have happen if we want to support wildlife. So, again, providing nesting space and cover, and we talked about evergreens. We talked about the hawthorn with its big thorns, and oak trees, but we also don't want to forget about some of our hedge plants and some of our brambles like blackberries. They're thorny, they're thick, and they provide really great nesting and cover for so many species of birds and other small animals. And if you're into observing, or you want to help science and kind of go a step above, you can look at iNaturalist. Beechwood Farms Nature Reserve does have a spot where you could put in your observations that you see at the reserve, or you could do this on your own in your own backyard. So it's a really fun way to kind of chart what's happening in your yard. You can see it from, over time and watch it grow and increase and know that you're supporting so much out there by just having a beautiful garden. So who wouldn't want to do that? Well, I really want to thank everybody for sticking with me, and hopefully you learned a thing or two about some things that we can do in the fall to help support wildlife habitat and our beautiful birds and other resident animals. I want to send a special thank you to the Fox Chapel Garden Club for supporting the native plant programs in 2024. So they're so kind and generous, and so thank you very much. Oopsie. And yeah, if you want to visit us, please do. We have a variety of hikes at 9 a.m. at all of our reserves. They're all free and open to the public. We have public programs throughout the year. Many of them are free or very low cost. And we're also having an October fall tree and shrub sale. So if you want to stop by and visit us and grab some plants and chat about your garden, we'd love to see you out here at Beechwood. So thank you very much again, and I hope you get outside and have a lovely weekend. Thanks, everyone.